I love my country. I love my family. And I have dedicated my life to both of them. These risks, these burdens that I took on, I knew were coming. And no one should be in a position to make these kind of decisions. That's not the kind of place that we're supposed to be. But it doesn't have to be. Of course, I look forward to coming home. But I cannot support the persecution of those charged under an Espionage Act when they have committed no espionage. And this is a duty that I believe we all owe to those yet to come.
NSA contractor Edward Snowden is shedding new light on his decision to reveal classified documents about the U.S. government's mass surveillance program. You said in the book that you wish you had had a strategy in terms of a what's next plan once you release these documents. You sit here 6 years later in exile in Moscow, where you've said you don't want to be. Was it worth it?
It was. I mean, when we look at these, all of these complexities and all of the consequences that we have as a result of any of the decisions as we go through our lives, I think we realize that, look, we see chances, opportunities in life where we can make a decision to try to change something. And right now, it's hard to look around at the world and think nothing needs to change. But nothing changes just if we believe in something. We have to actually be willing to risk something. We have to actually be willing to stand for something. I was required to swear an oath when I entered onto duty in the CIA. It's a very solemn thing. You're in a darkened room in front of a flag. Everyone else is there. But it's important to notice that we did not say an oath of secrecy. One of the common misconceptions and one of the early attacks that you heard a lot in 2013, you don't hear so much anymore, is that I violated this oath of secrecy. That does not exist. There's a secrecy agreement, but there's also an oath of service. And the oath of service is to support and defend not an agency, not even a president. It's to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, and this is a direct quote, foreign and domestic. And so this begs the question, what happens when our obligations come into conflict, right? What happens when you have a secrecy agreement, but you have also witnessed your own government, your own agency, your workplace violating the rights of Americans and people around the world on a massive scale? And this was actually one of the hardest parts of coming forward, was that I couldn't talk to anybody about it. Because this is the bizarre sort of circumstance of the way our laws are currently structured. In 2013, I was a contractor working for the NSA through a private company. I worked in an NSA facility. I had an NSA boss. You know, I was working at NSA systems, doing NSA tasks. But formally, just on paper, I worked for a private company. Now, these contractors weren't covered by whistleblower protection laws. If I had tried to talk to, a judge, a priest, a congressman, it would have been the same felony. If I had talked to my family, it would have been the same felony. And of course, if I had talked to a journalist, they consider telling the truth about the government breaking the law is itself a crime. And so I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't tell the love of my life, who's a central figure in the story, Lindsay Mills, my longtime partner, because if I had, the FBI could have charged her as a kind of accessory to the crime, so long as she didn't immediately after hearing from me, I'm thinking about talking to journalists, picked up the phone and said, help, help, somebody's going to talk to the press. And so that made it a very isolating experience.
Edward, do you acknowledge that you broke the law and that there are many people in this country who see your actions as traitorous?
Well, I won't take a position on whether or not I broke the law, because that's one for lawyers. But what I will say is this. It's not hard to make the argument that I broke the law, and I think that's actually the less interesting question. It's funny that whenever the government comes after me, they say, these disclosures cause harm. But they never justify the harm. They never show evidence for it, even though we're now more than 6 years on. It would be the easiest thing in the world to show.
But Edward, to be
we've
fair,
never heard that story.
Edward,
well, hang on.
Sorry to break in here, but on the question of harm, I don't know that you're. Forgive me, but how are you in a position to judge the harm of your disclosures? Isn't that something that the intelligence community would be uniquely situated to gauge?
Well, I would argue I worked for the U.S. intelligence agency for quite a long time. I am the only one who knows the actual documents that the journalists have and the ones that they published. We all know. So it's available to all of us to assess the harms. And again, if they had some classified information, if they had some classified evidence that, a hair on a single person's head was harmed, you know as well as I do, it would be on the front page of the New York Times by the end of the day. Because leaking is not something that only happens that people that are working to inform the press are doing. It's also what the government does to sort of backstop their positions. There are authorized leaks that happen all the time that are not public interest whistleblowing, right? But back to that question of, did I break the law? Again, what's the question that's more important here? Was the law broken, or was that the right thing to do? If you look back at the history of the United States, it doesn't take very long for the average person to think about a moment in which it was absolutely illegal to do something, but at the same time, it was absolutely the right thing to do.
I would assume they just didn't want you to go anywhere, and you happened to be in Moscow. They didn't think it through.
Right. Imagine you're the director of the NSA, or you're the CIA. And you've got this guy out there, and he's the person that you hate the most in the world. And you know all your authorities, you know all your incredible powers, you know even the things that I didn't know with all of my access, right? All the ways you can get people. And then you go, we really don't like this guy, we really want to do something about him. Would you rather me be in Moscow or literally anywhere else? Right? And so to me, it's very strange. The government worked quite hard to keep me exiled specifically in Russia. And I've always been a little bit, particularly as years have gone by, and you can't explain it away simply as a mistake of policy back then. They've had time to rectify it. They realize that me being in Russia provides them with an evergreen political attack that doesn't have to be explained. It doesn't have to be justified. Simply the association with Russia is enough for them to call into question my character.
And some Americans would say, really? He went to China? And admittedly, it was Hong Kong and different then, and Russia, these two countries, and there was no other way to get to Latin America except through Russia?
Right, certainly. And this was subject of much debate, and it was, again, borne out. There was a lot of public reporting on this back in 2013 when it was contemporary. The reality is you can't fly from Hong Kong, or at least couldn't fly from Hong Kong at the time, to Latin America without crossing U.S. airspace, unless you went the long way around, right? And so then you do this and you have to go, it's a very short list. What are the non-extradition countries to get from Hong Kong all the way over to South America? And again, it's just building a bridge through the air step by step. And, my whole flight manifest at this point has been made public. There were journalists on the flight that I was ticketed for from Moscow to Havana, taking pictures of my empty seat when I was prevented from boarding. And so, yeah, this has all been looked into, and it's just, to me, it's frustrating, but it's also interesting because I wonder, if they did this intentionally, if they did this strategically, it was really the most brilliant move they made in terms of communications planning that they could have. I'm not sure we can give them that much credit because it very well could have been a moment of panic. One of the important things is when we look at these things like Google, aggregating information about like how many people are going to retail stores, how many people are out and traveling. Google's got this information. They're showing us this information, as you said, in a pseudo-anonymous way. But what information are they not showing us? What information do they have? How do they gather it? How do they collect it? Google is not, in a meaningful way, a cellular services provider, right? So there's two ways that location information is tracked broadly historically from mobile devices. And now there's a third, which is code tracking applications that sort of piggybacks on a previous one earlier. But we talked earlier about this fabric, all these people you got to trust as your communications cross the internet. The internet is a physical object, right? A lot of people, when they're using like, Wi-Fi or cellular, it's hard to visualize that, to recognize that. You just type in Instagram or whatever, you flick your little finger and, more pictures come up in magic. But think for a minute how that happens. Let's make it simple. Take the internet part of the equation out. When you dial somebody's phone number, wherever they are in the world, or somebody dials your phone number, your phone rings instantly. How does that happen? What is required by the architecture as it exists today? And who's activating it? Who made your phone ring, right?